I mean, I'm here. I couldn't make it into the office. I have another.
Same here. I had 4 meetings yesterday and 4 today, and yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yes.
not
I
enough
have
time to
four
drive
today as
around.
well. Yes, I hear you. All right. Good morning. Good morning. I see it's 9:30. Do we have confirmation of quorum?
We do.
Okay. All right. We're okay to start the meeting. Um, welcome to today's meeting of February 22nd of 2023. That was a lot of twos. We have confirmation of quorum. Can we have I'd like to acknowledge that we're located on the traditional territory of the Likotak people. We have adoption of the agenda.
Move adoption of the agenda for today, Colburn.
Second, Davis.
All right. Any discussion? Any opposed? See none? Okay, carry on. Adoption of previous minutes of the inaugural meeting from January 25th, 2023.
Move adoption.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call question. Business arising from minutes. Hearing none. On to chair's report. I do not have a report at the moment. Just I am happy chairing this meeting. Staff reports. Summary of work completed from First Nations Relations Committee. Move that the report from the CAO be received.
So moved, Colburn.
Second, Momini.
Mr. Chair, I believe Azalee will speak to this.
Okay. I will hand the floor over.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Azalee Millwood. I'm a First Nation person from the Kwanlin First Nation, and I am Tagish Kwan from Whitehorse, Yukon. Thank you, Chair Jules, for acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Liquidok people. That starts us off in a good way to give us a sense of place and space. So what we are going to discuss is the summary of work completed in the past 2 years. Much of the work completed as presented by the resources that I looked into were training and other items, mainly cultural awareness training and the attached table, which was about sharing knowledge, increased engagement. Once again, we revisited this last meeting was the territorial acknowledgement policy, and that verbal territorial acknowledgement was approved and is there is a summary table for that. Also, the committee and staff, and as well as board members, participated in the National Indigenous Peoples Day. Other items include First Nation relationships and governance session, which was included with the cultural awareness and safety training. These are based off the goals that were presented with the First Nations Relations Committee in 2021. Many of those goals were achieved, as you can see in the table that was presented from 2021. So basically, I presented the goals that were achieved. Any questions? Thank you.
Yes, Max, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I might be a little bit confused. Forgive me, I'm quite new here, filling in for Mark Manesh. So my understanding that at the last committee meeting, the First Nations Relations Committee passed a land acknowledgement, or is that on this agenda to be discussed and decided? A question, maybe generally for the group. We are going to be deciding some things about our land acknowledgement, is that correct? And that discussion will happen later in a different agenda item.
Yeah, that is the next report.
Thanks.
I have a
Any
question.
more questions? Yep.
I have a question. I really appreciated the report. Thank you, Azalee. It was really nice to see all the things that have already been happening, and I know that you're working on a plan for the next few years in education for us directors and staff. And I was looking at the directors portal and the First Nations relations resources that you have there, and it was interesting that you have examples, or we have examples of memorandums of understanding between First Nations and other areas. And I was wondering if there's any work, or if that's something that we have considered with the Strathcona Regional District, creating those.
In terms of specific memorandums of understanding, I can't comment on that. I'm not too familiar.
Hello.
I also, if you could be more specific, I mean, you can have a memorandum of understanding about the number of things. Do you have something in mind?
It was more just like, I guess, intergovernmental relationships and how those would proceed.
Good morning, everyone. Renee Labacane here, Manager of Strategic Initiatives. And those were uploaded as examples and things that we would strive towards. So as we build those relationships with our First Nations partners, that we would initiate to collectively memorandum of understandings on work that we may want to do together.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. That helps.
When we went through KCFN joining the Strathcona Regional District, there was like a booklet. Do you know if that was handed out to any of the newly elected members of this around the table?
I received it and read it. Thank you. I thought it was pretty well done.
Okay, thanks. I was just making sure. Thank you. Any more questions?
So, Mr. Chairman, you have a motion to receive the report currently on the floor.
Yes, a motion to receive, I believe it was first and seconded, correct?
That is correct.
I'll call question. Any opposed? Okay, hear none, carried. So that moves us on to our next item, which is the First Nations territorial acknowledgement.
I'll move that the report from the CAO be received. Colburn?
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second, Davis.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe Azalee will speak to this as well.
Thank you. I'll hand the floor over to you.
Yes, good morning. I'm responding to the last meeting on January 25th regarding adding the Slaman First Nation to the territorial acknowledgement. As indicated in the January 25th report that I drafted, it indicates that this is a community-based territorial acknowledgement. I understand the sentiment to be inclusive with overlapping nations, and I've given a thorough explanation for the reason that I went based on community. And so my response is that I don't believe at this point we should add the Slaman Nation due to not knowing how Klahoose Nation feels about that. When you have overlapping territories, many territories can go beyond adding the Slaman Nation to this territorial acknowledgement because of the treaty process and nations stating that this is their traditional territory. I'm not debating that there are many overlapping territories. However, to keep this into perspective, I kept it community-based. I have spoken to other regional districts, and this is not a unique problem. I wouldn't call it a problem. Basically, I'm keeping it at community-based. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I see that there are two options on the table.
Could I speak, Chair?
Yes, and then I see Max's hand up as well, and that he can speak next.
I absolutely do appreciate staff's work on this, and I appreciate the outreach that it takes. And this is not, I don't see this as I see this as a work in progress, and we're always working to try to acknowledge, accommodate, include. And so if there is at a later date more information from another nation, then that can be added. But I absolutely trust staff has done their work to do the outreach and prevent us from doing anything that would alienate us from the nations that we work really closely with, not saying that we don't work closely with the other nations that are claiming that this is their territory. So that's, I would suggest that we recommend to the board that we proceed with what staff has given us, and that we move on from there in a good way. Thanks.
Thank you. Are you wanting to move one of these options?
Not yet, because we're still on receipt, but I would afterwards have a subsequent. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Max. You're on mute, Max.
Thanks. I would echo that suggestion of considering land acknowledgement as kind of a living statement that develops as we drew through our learning. So appreciate taking that perspective towards it. Mark took the initiative to consult with the chief of the Klahoose First Nation, Stephen Brown, and Um, I have correspondence here before me from Stephen Brown, which I could read out. He says, yikes, I'll be honest, this briefing note is not good, referring to the discussion paper. Scattered seems to dismiss the point of a land acknowledgement, an oversimplification, and glossing over reconciliation. I also don't recall Clahous ever being consulted, which contradicts the note. Tla'amin should be recognized. They've confused territory and location of occupation, which they also acknowledge is a problem in the note. So we're hearing from Chief Brown that it would be appropriate to include Tla'amin, and I'm understanding that the sort of location of settlements is maybe not best way to recognize territory, that, you know, the broader territory is pretty important as a part of First Nations rights and identities and culture. So yeah, wondering if we at this time and make some plans for further consultation, as well as including Tla'amin based on that recommendation from Chief Brown.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make a comment. This is going to be an ongoing challenge for us when we have staff that have responsibilities. They have, in this case, heritage connections, relationships with First Nations. We task them to do work and we bring back recommendations to the committee. And then we have individual directors going out, doing the work of staff and coming back with contradictory recommendations. So this is a staff recommendation, and I don't know moving forward, if we continue on this path, if we're ever going to get anywhere.
I would like to comment that I did reach out to Chief Brown. He did not return my call. I also reached out to one of his knowledge keepers. Well, not his, one of the knowledge keepers from the Clahous Nation. And what they responded was, thank you. Thank you for asking, and that they would speak to the elders. Once again, I would like to mention, albeit individuals want this to be prehistorical, historical, we know which communities, we know that. We know which communities are located within the SRD. We don't know exactly which territories are overlapping. You're going to have a dialogue from one nation's knowledge keeper, from another nation's knowledge keeper, and nobody's going to walk away satisfied. And territorial acknowledgements have been presented by First Nation people since I've ever known it. And sometimes what it looks like is it opens up the floor. It's not perfect. We've had 200 years of colonization. It's not going to be perfect. This is pieces of reconciliation. But what a territorial acknowledgement does is it opens the floor for First Nation people like me to say, wow, thank you for acknowledging. I'd like to tell you who I am now. What is important is the intent. Perfection is not going to happen. It's just not. And in that, I'm going to mention that First Nations were destabilized by disease, relocations, and government assimilation policies that divided them into small settlements, reserves, and bands, so they no longer operated as a collective. So the passing of oral history and Indigenous laws, those were interrupted. And I don't disagree with what the chief of the Clahous Nation is stating. I'd love for him to give me a call and talk to me about that. So I continue to keep this recommendation based on that. And also, when we have overlapping territories from other nations, what are we going to do? And also, I'd like to say the Clahous Nation's traditional territory, according to a map, I'd like to know why they're not acknowledged in the Comox Regional District. Well, I'm just saying this is what what can be opened up. I mean, this is something that could happen. There's different territories, and
Just one note to add, I believe it was in the report too, if I may, Mr. Chair. The Tla'amin Nation has unique property ownership on Cortes Island. Oddly enough, it is actually not in our regional district, and it is acknowledged in the Kathak Regional District. So there is a land acknowledgement by the regional district that they're in. I know that seems unusual, but that is the case, and don't believe there is any community on Cortes of this nation.
Thank you. As from a First Nations perspective, we have certain protocols, and I just have a question about, like, we have staff that reach out to these nations that we're speaking of. Well, what is the difference between, not the difference, but what, like, when directors go out and they do this on their own, it speaks for the regional district as well, but would that be overstepping our staff?
In my opinion, it would. I mean, if you hire a First Nations heritage person to do First Nations relations work, they go out and do First Nations consultation, representing reports and recommendations to staff. And then if you have 14 individual directors going to do their own work on that, I would say that's kind of overstepping the role of the First Nations coordinator, in my opinion.
Yeah, that is definitely how I feel about it, and that is what I meant why we have protocols, which means, like, it should. I don't want to get lost in the communication with being bombarded by all of our members here, and we do have staff that do their job very well, and I do see it as overstepping, because we need to keep that communication key, and we need to keep the communication proper between from nation to nation that we speak to.
I have a question, or two.
Yes,
and
go ahead.
one of them is, I was looking at the director's portal and the First Nations resources, and I was curious about exactly what you're talking about, Director Jules, about what the protocol is for a director to speak to a First Nation person or representative in their electoral area, because I didn't see that, and I have in the past had direct communication with nation representatives within Area C, and now I'm wondering, is that something that I shouldn't be doing? And is there a protocol for that, and does that need to be brought and presented, and so that all directors are aware of what that arrangement is? And I guess that goes back to that whole director's portal and what information is available for directors.
Well, I have a couple comments on that, I suppose. One is, again, if you have an engineering question, you ask the engineer. I think if we have a First Nations question, you're always easy to default on our First Nations coordinator and consult her. She's always available for us. So if you're unsure, we may not have a specific protocol for it, but you can never go wrong by consulting Azlee and asking her what would be appropriate. Part of her role, or a significant part of her role, is to create relations with the different nations. These are people, and they're not always going to fit into a confined box or role. And how we approach different people, they may see things differently. So I think even having a protocol procedure would be great. However, I would err on caution of consulting Azlee, as her role is to establish relationships and connect us with these folks.
Thank you.
Chair Jules, I would like to
Yes.
comment that I came into a set of resources and a set of work done by the previous First Nations Relations Coordinator. And of those resources, I didn't disagree with them. I tried to look at them critically, and I didn't disagree with them. And in fact, in designing this territorial acknowledgement, I would like to state that I honored the old ways and walked the good path in doing this. And I tried to look at a diversity of individuals I consulted with, meaning male elders, female elders, community members, both male and female, young and old. So I would just like to also let the committee know that that was also done. I tried to consult with a diversity of people. Now, mind you, it's in Campbell River, and so the thought around elders is that they are grounded in knowledge and that they try their best to be neutral. So this was how it was brought to me, and so this continues to be my recommendation for the acknowledgement.
Thank you. I have on my speakers list of Mayor Davis and then Max.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On a slightly different topic, I don't know if this is a minor quibble, but I'd just like to canvass our council here and hear what people have to say about it. Just in the land acknowledgement, I noticed that it specifically acknowledges the land that the corporate office is on. I know most people don't really know where our corporate office is. I mean, I wouldn't have known if I wasn't on the regional district. But I'm wondering if it should be recognizing the entire region of the district first and the various First Nations that we overlap with, and then follow it up with the corporate office. To me, it makes more sense, but I'd just like to hear what everybody else has to say. Thanks.
If I may, Mr. Chair, respectfully, what may make sense to us may not make sense to the nations. And again, we have a First Nations person as a coordinator, and her recommendation is that we follow this process. So if we're second guessing her, I think that defeats the purpose of her role here.
I would like to speak to that. The corporate offices here and the Strathcona Gardens, which was added, are in Campbell River. And when we reach out, whether it be in a land plan or whether the directors come from their various communities via boat, via car, you're coming into Liquidoc territory. And when you make decisions and go back to your prospective regions, you're making decisions from Liquidoc territory. The way that I can compare this is sometimes you will be on webinars or spaces where there is First Nation people or there are land acknowledgements. For example, if Chair Jules is in Cayuga-Chekislat territory, he would say, I'm reaching out from Cayuga-Chekislat territory. It's the territory you're on. And I think would be extremely disrespectful to add everyone else when decisions are made at this office, and it is Liquidoc territory. When I was young, I worked for a group of archaeologists, and I said to them, how come we're digging up the gold rush and then my ancestors are underneath that? And they said, well, a good camp spot has always been a good camp spot. So this spot is a central hub for a reason, and we should acknowledge the Liquidoc people as that we're here because this resource is needed to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Max?
Yeah, it sounds like
Sorry, you're cutting out.
some work time.
Maybe turn off your video there, Max.
I will try. Okay, sure. Sounds like we need some protocol development specifying process for contacting local First Nations. I think that I can imagine that part of the work around the land acknowledgement is the consultation and developing those relationships. So I could totally respect what I'm hearing about having Azalea, our staff, taking on that role of doing the consultation, and I think that that's great. And want to acknowledge that it would have been great to have a check-in about our own Area B consultation with the Klahoose First Nation. So happy to take that process forward. And I think that Mark has a personal relationship with the chief of the Klahoose First Nation, so that also made it more, a little bit more of a priority for him to check in, as well as probably facilitated access. I think a lot of people can be stymied in contacting the Klahoose First Nation. There's a lot of priorities on Chief and Council's desk, and sort of our outsider needs are not always, floating to the top of the list. So in this case, it could be that that personal relationship was actually key to getting the kinds of consultation that was necessary, which is, a valuable asset that we could leverage and build on too. I think a lot of the work that we want to do with this committee.
I can speak. Just wanted to say that I'm going to look forward to supporting Councillor Colburn's motion when we get to that, a motion recommended by staff. If we have electoral directors that have information they think is going to influence the report, they should be submitting that to staff well before the report is published and brought to the board. I watched these kinds of things happen for 4 years at the City of Campbell Rivers Council meetings, and it does not create a healthy relationship between staff and council. So it would be good to start seeing information be sent to staff when we receive it, rather than waiting until we're sitting in a board meeting like this. I had breakfast with Chief Ronnie Shakite this morning, and if I had any information from him that was going to affect a decision that council was going to make in the City of Campbell River next week, I'd be submitting that to our clerk right away so they could include that and use it to factor in the decision and recommendations made to council. And I don't think it's any different here. If directors have a personal relationship and gain information that they think should be pertinent to the report, then they should be supplying that well ahead of time. That supports staff and the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes. Yes.
This is also regarding the language of the territorial acknowledgement, and really the only concern that I have is the word also. And for me, the word also at the beginning of the second sentence seems to diminish the other. It puts it, and maybe that's the intention, is to sort of highlight the Legal Talk people and the fact that we are centered in Campbell River here at this office. But the word also just seems to be a little bit diminishing to me of the other nations.
Thank you.
Again, Mr. Chair, this is the recommendation from our First Nations coordinator. If the committee wants to wordsmith it, I think it makes her recommendations and position fairly irrelevant. This is based on her relationships, her interaction, her communication. This is the best language that she is submitting, and I would suggest either the committee supports it or comes up with a different resolution, and we move forward with that.
Thank you. Do we have a motion on the floor?
No.
You're still on receipt, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any more discussion? I'll call question. And any opposed? Okay. So that moves us to we're going with option 1.
Yeah, so I would make a subsequent, if I could, Chair, that we recommend that the first territorial acknowledgement, it states we respectfully acknowledge our corporate office in the Strathcona Gardens Regional Complex are located on the traditional territory of the Lake-Odawa people. We also recognize we operate within the traditional treaty and unceded territories of Ihatasat, Hamalko, Cayuga, Checosit, Clahus, Comox, Mauchet, Mushlet, Nuchatlet, Cluitzis, Wewakai, and Wewakum First Nations, and that the corporate policy CP031 be amended accordingly.
Second.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a question. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Motion carried. That moves us on to our correspondence. So Cayuga Checklisted First Nations Tourism. That the February 13th, 2023 media release from the Island Coastal Economic Trust regarding the strategic tourism acquisition by Cayuga Checklisted First Nations be received.
So
Move
moved.
receipt.
Second, Colburn.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion?
I would like to say something, and that is congratulations to the Cayuga Checklisted First Nation. This is a significant upgrade and a great announcement. Exciting times.
Exciting, very exciting. Thank you. Yes, Mayor Davis.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say, as a member of ICT and director on the board, that I was really pleased to see this come forward and to vote in favor of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the results. I think it'll be a great benefit to the community.
Yes, yes, definitely. It's an amazing first step in the right direction for our community, and definitely looking forward to having this at home permanently. It's awesome. Thank you. I'll call a question. Any opposed? Hear none. Passed. Thank you. I believe that moves us on to director's reports, new business, addendum items, closed session, termination.
Move termination, Colburn.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call question. All right. We are terminated. Oh, any oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the word right now?
Any opposed?
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
See you on the next one.
Yes, see you guys in a couple hours. Chew.
Cheers.